and then the fall. You didn't expect it here, not now, not after the completion and the pride and the sense of arrival. You had not accounted for the specific vulnerability of someone who has just made themselves fully visible for the first time. The nakedness of it, the way the armor of process is stripped away the moment the work is released into the world and must stand without you beside it to explain or defend. The response is not what you imagined, not catastrophic. There is no public humiliation, no dramatic rejection. Something more complicated and in some ways more difficult to navigate. A muted response. A silence where you expected signal. The work goes out and the world continues its ordinary business, and the silence is not the silence of contempt, but the silence of a world that is simply vast and full and not organized around the completion of your project. However much your interior life has been organized around it for 14 months, you handle the silence poorly. In the absence of the external response you needed, the internal response fills the vacuum. And what fills it is not the pride of the Sunday evening, but its shadow. The voice that has been waiting, patient and resourceful, for exactly this kind of opening. It says, "See, you overestimated yourself. You thought this was more than it is. You thought you were more than you are." It says the things it has always said with the same vocabulary, only now it has material to work with. The actual finished thing, which can be pointed to and measured against your hopes and found, in the silence, to fall short. You make two decisions in this period that you will later understand as mistakes made in the pain of misreading the silence. You alter the work, not improve it, alter it, adjust it toward what you imagine a wider reception might want, sanding off the specific corners of it that are most genuinely yours because those corners feel in the silence like liabilities. The altered version is worse. You can feel it going worse as you do it, the life leaving it in real time. But you cannot stop, because stopping would require admitting that the alteration was fear rather than craft, and admitting that would require sitting with the fear, and sitting with the fear requires a solidity of self that the silence has temporarily dissolved. The second mistake is isolation. You stop talking to your mentor. You stop showing the work to anyone. You convince yourself this is because you need space to think, but the truth, which you will see clearly later from the other side of it, is that you are ashamed, not of the work, but of how you responded to the silence, of the alteration, of the evidence, embarrassing and specific, that the growth of the past year and a half has not been complete enough to protect you from the oldest pattern. The abandonment of yourself in the face of the world's insufficient response. 3 months pass in this shadow, not nothing months. The discipline holds in a skeleton form. The notebook stays open. The life continues its motion. But the specific quality of aliveness that characterized the best months is absent. You are going through the motions of building while the interior conviction that makes the motions meaningful has temporarily, quietly gone dark. The flicker is there, but you have stopped looking for it. Your mentor finds you, not dramatically. A phone call on a weekday evening, the ordinary miracle of someone who has been thinking about you deciding to act on the thought. You almost don't answer. You see the name on the screen and feel the weight of the months of silence between you and the conversation that would be required to account for them. And the weight is almost sufficient to send the call to voicemail. You answer. The conversation is not the one you feared. There is no accounting required, no explanation demanded, no inventory of the months taken. Instead, they ask a single question after the brief and necessary surface exchange. What does the work need? Not what do you need? Not how are you feeling? What does the work need? The question reaches past all the accumulated debris of the difficult months and lands somewhere cleaner. You find yourself answering not the performed answer, not the answer that explains or justifies or defends, but the actual answer, the one you have been sitting with alone and unable to articulate. The work needs to be returned to itself. The alterations need to be undone. The specific corners that are most genuinely yours, the ones you sanded off in fear, need to be restored, not because they guarantee reception, but because without them the work is not yours, and a work that is not yours cannot do what only yours can do. You spend 2 weeks restoring, not rebuilding. The foundation is still there, intact beneath the anxious amendments, restoring, uncovering what was already right. And in the uncovering, you feel something return, not pride yet, not the clean Sunday evening certainty, but something prior to pride, recognition. The recognition of your own voice, the specific and unrepeatable frequency of your particular thinking. Return to the page after an absence that felt much longer than it was. You send the restored version to your mentor. You wait. They call back in the evening. You can hear the quality of the silence before they speak. The full silence, the one that means something is being received. And when they speak, they say, "This is the real thing." 4 words. You ask what changed. They say you stopped trying to be receivable. You started being true. You write this in the notebook, not as a caption or an epigram, as a lesson paid for in full, a piece of knowledge that is now yours, in the way only earned knowledge is yours. That cannot be revoked because it is written in the experience of having needed it. The silence of the world has not changed. The work is the same work it was, now restored, and the vastness of the world is the same vastness it always was. But your relationship to the silence has changed. The silence is not verdict. The silence is the world being the world. The world does not organize itself around your work. The work is organized by you, according to your values, according to the truth you can access, and it is then released into the world's indifferent vastness, where it will find the people it is meant to find. Not all people, not immediately, but its people, in its time. This is enough. This has to be enough. And surprisingly, standing in it clearly, it is. The work finds people, not all at once, not in the wave you once imagined. The surge of recognition that would announce your arrival, and the way their real things spread, which is quietly and person by person from one specific hand to another. Someone reads it and thinks of someone else. Someone shares it not broadly but precisely. The way people share things that have genuinely moved them, with care, with the implicit endorsement of their own taste and vulnerability. And the summons accumulate. You begin receiving messages, letters, if you want to use the older word. They arrive in the way that the responses to your first share did not. Not as evaluation, not as critique or validation from a position of judgment, but as the reports of people who have been reached. They say, "I didn't know someone could say this. I didn't know I was waiting for this." They say, "I read this at the worst point of my year, and it did something I can't quite explain." They say things that are awkward and earnest and unpolished in the way that genuine responses to genuine things always are. Because the people moved by real work are not usually critics. They are just people, ordinary and specific, and carrying the full weight of their own interior lives, and they are reaching toward you across that weight. You read everyone, not because you need the validation, and this distinction matters. It is the distinction that marks everything before it, but because each message is, in some essential way, a confirmation of the original premise that the most interior, most specific, most authentically yours thing you could make would be the most universal, that the deeper you went into your particular truth, the more you accessed something shared, that the privacy of genuine expression is, paradoxically, the most generous thing you can offer a reader. You write back to most of them, not performatively, not with the managed warmth of someone maintaining an audience, but genuinely person to person, the way you would respond to someone who had said something true to you across a table. This is the shape of the work now. Not a single mountain to climb, not a destination to arrive at, a continuous making and offering, a sustained conversation between your interior and the world's, mediated by the specific objects of your craft. The work is no longer a project. It has become a practice, which is what all real work eventually becomes, the daily form of who you are, indistinguishable from the living of the life. The job situation resolves itself, as entangled situations eventually do, in a way that requires courage but not drama, a conversation, a decision, a leaving. The financial pressure does not disappear overnight, but the trajectory changes. New work finds you because the work you have done has made you visible in the right way, not visible as someone who performs competence, but visible as someone with something genuine to offer. You are not comfortable. You are not at ease in the soft, unchallenged way that comfort requires. You are in the specific aliveness of someone whose life is their work and whose work is their life. And the days are demanding in the way that only meaningful things can demand, requiring everything you have, taking it gladly, returning something you could not have named before you had it. You would not trade it. You have thought this before, and it has been true before, but it is truer now. You understand failure differently now. This is not a small shift. To understand failure differently, to encounter it not as verdict but as curriculum, is to change the entire operating system of your relationship with risk, with ambition, with the scale of what you are willing to attempt. The person you were at the beginning of this story calculated risk in terms of what could go wrong. Every decision was filtered through the question of loss, of damage, of the evidence failure would provide to the ancient critic who had been waiting for precisely that evidence. You played, as a result, a smaller game than you were capable of, choosing the attempts that were most likely to succeed over the attempts that were most worth making. You live differently now, not recklessly. Risk management is still a real thing, and the bills are still real, and the world still operates on consequences, but differently. The filter has changed. The question is no longer primarily what can go wrong, but what matters enough to risk going wrong for. This is the reorientation that people who have genuinely been through the fire come out carrying, not the absence of the fear of failure, but a different relationship to what failure means. Failure means you are attempting something real. Failure means the gap between your current capacity and your aspiration was wide enough to fall into, which means your aspiration was genuine, not pre-calibrated to guarantee success. Failure means you were in the territory where growth actually happens rather than in the safe lowlands where nothing is risked and therefore nothing is gained and nothing is truly lost. Just slowly, quietly, voluntarily surrendered. You have also changed your relationship to time, the urgency that drove the early months, the panicked quality of someone trying to make up for years of delay, trying to compress the education of a decade into the intensity of one, has softened into something more sustainable. The work is long, the becoming is long. There is no catching up, because there was never a race. There is only your life, the specific and unrepeatable length of it, and the question of how it is spent. You spend it building now, not frantically, with intention. 1 hour, one page, one conversation at a time. You think of the people who are where you were, the ones lying in the gray morning paralysis, the ones in the jobs that are technically adequate and fundamentally wrong, the ones with the notebook open to the question they have not yet answered, the ones who were told to be realistic at the exact moment they needed to be encouraged. You think of them often, and with the specific tenderness of recognition. You don't know what to do with this tenderness yet. You suspect it is pointing somewhere. You suspect that part of the legacy of what you have lived through is the obligation to turn back, to say to the person standing where you stood, it is possible. I know it's possible because I did it, not because I was different from you, because I was exactly like you and I kept going. This impulse, this turning back is new. For most of the journey, you are facing forward, your whole attention directed at the work, the growth, the becoming. Facing forward is the only way to begin, but at some point in the development of a person, the facing forward is joined by a turning back, not in retreat, not in nostalgia, but in the recognition that the path you have walked is of use to others, that the surviving of it is not only yours, but a lantern. You are beginning to understand that mastery is not only what you become, it is what you make possible for others to become by having become it yourself. There is a conversation you have on a morning in spring that you will remember for the rest of your life. You are sitting across from someone young, not in years necessarily, though they are young in years too, but young in the specific way that means they have not yet been broken and rebuilt, that the difficult education is ahead of them rather than behind. They have found the work through the accumulating chain of person-to-person sharing. They have come to you not for answers exactly. They are not sure yet what they came for, which is often the condition of people who are about to discover something important. They are carrying that specific combination of desperate wanting and exhausted resignation. The cocktail of the person who knows they are capable of more than their current life but cannot yet see the architecture of the more. They ask you how you started, and you tell them, not the highlight version, not the curated retrospective that smooths the jagged parts into a clean narrative arc. You tell them about the gray morning, the 4-second paralysis on the pavement, the 2 lines in the notebook from 6 weeks before, the father's newspaper, the word realistic said by someone who cared about you and couldn't see that their care was taking the shape of a cage. You tell them about the Thursday morning at 5:30 and the 45 minutes of work you hated, about the session in December when it clicked and the months after the chaos when it almost stopped, about the silence that almost broke you and the restoration that saved the work by returning it to itself. You tell them about the flicker. They listen, and in their listening you can see, moving across their face in a series of small, involuntary expressions, the experience of recognition, the specific recognition of someone who is hearing their own interior life described in someone else's words. This is the moment, not the publication, not the messages, not the professional resolution. This is the moment you have been building toward without knowing it. This room, this conversation, the specific exchange between two people carrying the same wound at different points in its healing. You are not finished, you tell them. You will not be finished. The doubt is still there in the mornings. The work is still harder than the vision of the work. The world is still vast and indifferent and not organized around your becoming. All of that is still true. But here is also true. You are someone who builds things, someone who has been tested by everything the testing could find and has continued, someone who has fallen and fallen again and gotten up again until the getting up has become the most consistent thing about them, someone who knows, in the cellular, irreversible way that only experience can install, that the flicker does not go out, that you can cup your hands around it in the very worst weather and breathe on it, and it will hold. They are quiet for a moment after you finish. The spring morning is outside the window, light and green, and the city going about its ordinary, beautiful business, indifferent and alive. And they say, looking at their hands, looking up, I didn't know it was supposed to feel this hard. And you say, it's supposed to feel exactly this hard. The hardness is the point. The hardness is where you become. They look at you, and in their eyes you see the thing you have been the whole journey without being able to name it. Possibility, the specific and irreplaceable sight of a person encountering the evidence that their life is not fixed, that the story being lived from is not the only story available, that somewhere in the gap between who they are and who they are capable of becoming, there is a path, however invisible, that has been walked before. You walked it. You are walking it. The city looks different from here. Not physically. The geometry of it is unchanged. The streets running their same courses, the buildings keeping their same appointments with the sky. But the way you inhabit it is changed, and the change in the inhabitant changes the inhabitant, in the way that all perception is always also creation. You are the same person standing on the same pavement outside the same building where the 4-second paralysis happened years ago. But the person occupying that identity is unrecognizable to the one who stood there that morning in the thin drizzle, carried by the river of the crowd, barely staying upright under the weight of a life being postponed. The weight is still there. You want to be honest about this. You have always wanted to be honest about this, because the dishonesty of success stories is one of the things that cost you years. The weight is still there. The doubt still visits in the mornings. The work is still more difficult than you would choose if difficulty were optional. The world is still vast and indifferent, and there are still days when the vastness and the indifference align with your exhaustion and the old gravity pulls at you. The gravity of the small and the safe and the postponed. But here is the difference. The actual irrevocable difference between then and now. You know the weight. You know its name and its origin and its relationship to the voice that speaks in it. You know that the weight is not truth. It is history, wearing the costume of truth, performing a verdict that was never actually rendered. And knowing this, not intellectually, not as a concept, but in the body, in the bones, in the cellular memory of every morning you got up and worked anyway. Knowing this changes what you do with it. You carry it differently, not without burden, but without being crushed, not without fear, but without being governed. The weight has become information rather than verdict. a signal rather than a sentence. And the signal, when you have learned to read it accurately, says this: you are at the edge of your current capacity, and the edge of current capacity is the only place worth being. You open the notebook, the real one. There have been many real ones now, a shelf of them, the accumulated record of years of returning. This one is new, barely broken in, the pages carrying the specific potential of blank space. You sit at the table in the morning light, not lamplight now, but the actual early sun, which you have earned the right to by becoming someone who rises before it, and you write the first line. It is not the best line you have ever written. It probably will not be the best line in this notebook, but it is the next line, the one that follows from everything before it, that is only possible because of every imperfect, difficult, unglamorous, necessary word that came before it. It is the continuation, and continuation is, in the end, the only practice. Not arrival, not perfection, not the summit with the view and the finished work and the verdict of the world finally arranged in your favor. Continuation. Return, the daily unheroic decision to be the person who builds things, in the morning light, at the table, with the notebook open and the pen moving and the doubt present, but no longer in charge. You think about the person in the gray morning, the one who stood at the intersection while the light changed 3 times, the one who did not know that the flicker was already burning, had been burning all along, had survived every wind and every rain, had survived the years of smallness and the father's neutral face and the word realistic and the chaos, month and the silence and the fall, all of it, survived it all. You think about them with the tenderness of deep recognition, and you want to say something across the years, something that would have changed the quality of the waiting. You would say, it is not as far as it looks. The distance between where you are and where you are capable of being is not an ocean. It is a series of days, ordinary days, difficult and imperfect, each one requiring only the next step rather than all the steps. The transformation does not happen in the dramatic moment. It happens in the accumulation of unremarkable returns. The Tuesday morning with the cold alarm, the Thursday with the notebook, the December night with the 4 hours and the coffee going cold. You would say, the voice that says you are not enough, it is not telling the truth. It is telling a story, and you can, one word at a time, one returned morning at a time, write a different story. Not a story in which the difficulty disappears. A story in which you are someone who meets difficulty and is not destroyed by it. A story in which the wound becomes wisdom and the wandering becomes direction and the falling becomes the very mechanism of the rising. You would say, the flicker is real, whatever it is that lives in you. The capacity, the specific and unrepeatable thing that only your life and your mind and your particular accumulation of experience can make. It is real. It is not imagination. It is not vanity. It is the truest thing about you, and it has been waiting, patient as stone, for you to stop apologizing for it and start building from it. That is the legacy, not what you made, though what you made matters, and you are proud of it with the clean pride you have earned. The legacy is the living proof that the path exists, that someone exactly like you, not exceptional by birth, not protected from difficulty, not equipped at the beginning with anything more than the refusal to stay permanently down, walked it and came through and found, on the other side of all the falling and rising and falling again, a life that is genuinely, undeniably, irreversibly theirs. You write the second line. The morning holds its light. The city goes on below, and you at your table, in your life, with your work and your doubt and your discipline and the cracked spine notebook and the shelf of filled ones behind you, you go on too. Not because it is easy, not because you arrived, because you are the kind of person who continues, because continuing is what you became, because the flicker never, not once, not in all of it, went out. The morning you finally understand what the journey was for, it is not a dramatic morning. There is no sunrise painted in impossible colors outside your window. There is no swelling music in the background of your life. There is no single crystalline moment of revelation that you can point to and say, there, that is the instant when everything became clear. The world outside is ordinary. The coffee in your cup is the same temperature it always is. The city below your window is doing what cities do at this hour, waking slowly, accumulating its daily momentum, moving through its patterns with the magnificent indifference of something that has been doing this long before you arrived and will continue long after you are gone. And you are sitting at your table in the morning light that falls at the angle it falls at this time of year, with the notebook open in front of you and the pen in your hand. And the understanding arrives not like lightning, but like dawn, so gradually, so inevitably, that you cannot say precisely when the dark became light. You can only look up and notice it is light now. It has been light for a while. You have been on this journey for years. The counting of them feels less important now than it did at the beginning, when the years behind you felt like debt and the years ahead felt like urgency. Time, you have learned, is not the enemy it performs itself as. Time is the medium in which transformation occurs, and transformation, unlike most things the world values, cannot be rushed without being falsified. The person you are today required every single day that came before, including, especially, the days that felt like waste, like regression, like proof that nothing was changing. Those days were the invisible work, the sediment settling, the roots growing deeper in the dark where no one could see them, including you. You think about the beginning and the thinking is not painful. This surprises you still. A little, you expected the early memories to carry their original sting indefinitely, the way certain injuries are supposed to remain tender to the touch regardless of healing. But the gray morning on the pavement does not sting anymore. The 4-second paralysis while the crowd flowed around you like water around stone, you can hold that memory now without flinching, can in fact hold it with something approaching tenderness, the way you might hold a photograph of yourself as a child, someone you recognize and feel protective of, and cannot fault for not yet knowing what you know now. That person at the pavement was doing exactly what they were capable of doing at that exact moment. They were surviving. They were standing upright in the rain with the full weight of an unlived life on their shoulders, and they were still standing. That is not nothing. That was never nothing. You just couldn't see it from inside it. The apartment you lived in then, the one that smelled like yesterday, the dishes in the sink, the notebook with its 2 accusatory lines, the phone that you picked up and put down and picked up and put down in the loop of someone circling their own threshold without being able to cross it. That apartment is years behind you now, not just in geography, though you have moved, not just in circumstance. Though everything material has shifted, it is behind you in a more fundamental way. You are a different person than the one who lived there, not a better person in some moral arithmetic. You don't think in those terms anymore, having long since given up the harsh self-assessment that ranked your worth against a standard no one ever explicitly named but everyone seemed to understand. Different in the way that a person who has genuinely lived through something is different from the person who entered it, altered by the living, marked by the experience in ways that are not wounds anymore but are something harder and more structural. The thickened bone at the old fracture, the scar tissue that has less sensation than uninjured skin but considerably more integrity. The notebook in front of you is the latest in a series that now fills a shelf. You can see them from where you sit, their spines facing out, chronological by color and wear, the early ones more tattered from the anxious handling of someone who opened and closed them with the frequency of a person checking a wound. The later ones showing the more even wear, regular, confident use. They represent years of mornings, years of returning to the table, years of the discipline that replaced motivation when motivation proved itself, as it always does, to be a tourist rather than a resident. There are sessions recorded in those pages that you remember as the worst kind of work, the grinding, outputless, what is the point kind that feels like moving furniture in the dark and looking at the notebooks, knowing what they became. You understand those sessions not as failures but as maintenance, the way a relationship is maintained not only in the extraordinary moments of connection, but in the ordinary continuity of showing up, of being present, of choosing again and again the fact of the thing over the feeling about it. You have made things, real things, specific things, things that exist in the world now, with the stubborn permanence of objects, rather than the provisional existence of intentions. Not everything you made was good. This is an important piece of the honesty, because the mythology of creative transformation tends to skip this part, tends to imply that the breakthrough produces a stream of brilliance when in fact it produces a stream of work, some of which is brilliant and much of which is adequate and some of which is genuinely poor and all of which is necessary. You have made things that fell short of the vision that animated them. You have made things that succeeded technically while missing something essential. You have made things that were exactly what they needed to be, and then watched them be received by almost no one. And you have made things that seemed to you modest and provisional and watched them find somehow the specific people who needed them most. The relationship between the work you do and the response it receives is not the relationship you were told it would be. It is not meritocratic in any simple sense. It is more mysterious than that, more dependent on timing and context and the intersection of the right piece with the right person at the right moment in their life. You have made your peace with the mystery. The peace took a long time and cost something, but it is a genuine peace, not resignation, not the numbing of desire, but the actual accommodation to reality that allows you to do the work for its own sake rather than for the tally of its reception. The people who found the work, and there are people, real specific people who found it and whose finding of it changed something in their lives, and you know this because they told you, because they reached across the vast, anonymous distance of the world to tell you in language that was awkward and earnest and unmistakably real. These people are the part of the legacy that lives outside the notebooks. They are the continuation of the work beyond your making of it. Each one of them carries something from the work into a life you will never see, into rooms and mornings and difficult moments you will never know about. And in those rooms and mornings and difficult moments, the work does something you never intended and could never have predicted. It keeps company. It says, in the way that only genuinely made things can say, you are not alone in this. Someone was here before you, and they survived it, and their surviving became this, and this is here with you now, in your hands, in the dark. This is what you made. This is what you were building all along. To the gray mornings and the chaos month and the silence that almost broke you in the fall from the summit and the restoration and the continued, unglamorous daily practice. Not a product, not a credential, not a position in some hierarchy. A lantern. A hand reached back through the dark toward the person who is standing where you stood. That is the work. That is the whole work. And everything else, the craft, the discipline, the mastery, the books on the shelf and the sessions at the table, all of it is in service of that single, fundamental human gesture. Here is what I know. Here is what I survived. Here is proof that the path through this exists, because I walked it, and I am still walking it, and you can too. You pick up the pen. You think, as you often do in the morning before the first word of the day, about all the people who are currently in the rooms you have already left. The person in the gray morning paralysis. The person in the fluorescent office doing the Hartley report with a life's worth of unlived potential, quietly compressed behind their sternum. The person who had the idea and told someone and heard the word realistic and put the idea back in the drawer where it has been sitting ever since, slowly losing the luminosity it had when it was new. The person in the chaos month, holding too many things, making the mistakes that fear makes, lying awake at 4 in the morning, doing the arithmetic of their own inadequacy. Person in the silence after the first work goes out into the world, and the world continues its vast, uncaring rotation without stopping to acknowledge what the work cost. You want to speak to all of them. You want to say something that actually reaches them, that penetrates the specific insulation of their specific doubt and lands in the place where change begins. You know, because you have been that person, and you have since done the work of thinking about what would have helped, that most of what is offered to people in those rooms, the motivational architecture of modern self-improvement, the relentless positivity, the before and after narratives stripped of the ugly middle, most of it does not actually reach. It slides off the surface of real despair like water off glass. Because real despair is not uninformed about what it should do. Real despair is not waiting for the right piece of advice. Real despair is a state of disconnection from the self so profound that advice feels like it is being delivered in a language you once spoke and have since forgotten. What reaches you have found, what reached you in the specific moments when you were reachable, was not advice, but presence, not instruction, but recognition, not the formula for success, but the evidence of survival. The voice that said, I was there, not metaphorically, not in the general sense of human difficulty, but specifically in the gray and heavy way you are in it now, in the morning paralysis and the midnight arithmetic and the grief that follows the collapse. I was there, and here is what is true. It does not stay. The gray does not stay. The paralysis does not stay. Not because you fix it. You don't fix it. You don't solve the self the way you solve an equation, with a clean and permanent answer. But because you keep moving, and the moving itself changes things, and the things that change accumulate into a person who is, slowly and without ceremony, becoming capable of the life they were built for. That is the voice. That is the thing that reaches, and making that voice available, continuing to make it, refining it, deepening it with each new thing you learn and each new difficulty you survive. This is the practice. This is the reason for the shelf of notebooks and the years of mornings and the discipline that is now so embedded it no longer feels like discipline, but simply like the shape of who you are. Your mentor is still in your life, different now than at the beginning. The relationship has matured in the way relationships between people who are genuinely developing mature, which is toward increasing mutuality and decreasing hierarchy. They no longer feel like the authority you are appealing to, and you no longer feel like the students seeking dispensation. You feel like two people who have been on the same long road at different points and have enough shared understanding of the road to speak to each other with the shorthand of genuine common language. They still challenge you. The challenges are different now. They push at the edges of your current thinking rather than the foundations of your self-belief, because the foundations have been stress-tested enough times that they can be trusted, and the interesting work is at the edges, which is where all interesting work eventually migrates. They said something to you recently that you have been turning over in the slow, deep way you turn over things that are still revealing their implications. They said, the person you were at the beginning of this, the one on the pavement in the rain, they didn't fail to become who you are. They were always who you are, waiting for the conditions. You asked what that meant, because the first time you heard it, you weren't sure whether it was encouraging or merely philosophical. And they said, it means the potential was always there. The work didn't create it. The work revealed it, and the revealing took as long as it took, because the conditions had to be built, and the conditions had to be built from the inside. And building from the inside is the only kind of building that actually holds. You have been thinking about this ever since, about the relationship between the person you were and the person you are, and the question of whether these are two people or one person at different stages of the same life. You have decided they are one person, but the deciding took time because the differences feel so vast. The person in the gray morning had this in them. All of it, the discipline, the craft, the capacity to survive the chaos month and restore the work and find the language that reaches people in their own dark rooms. All of it was already there, compressed and unactivated, waiting for the pressure and the time and the daily returning that would eventually, inevitably, bring it to light. This is the most hopeful thing you know. More hopeful than any story of unusual talent or fortunate circumstance. More hopeful than the achievement itself. The fact that the potential was present from the beginning, not only yours, but everyone's, every single person currently standing on their own gray pavement, in their own thin drizzle, feeling the weight of their own unlived life pressing them toward the pavement. Every single one of them has this. The capacity is not the question. The capacity is not the limiting variable. The limiting variable is always the conditions, and the conditions can be changed, one morning at a time, one notebook at a time, one returned commitment at a time, until the compression is released and the life that was waiting inside the life that was being lived steps forward and takes its place. You have seen this happen now in people other than yourself. The young person you sat across from in the spring morning, the one with the desperate wanting and the exhausted resignation. You have watched them over the months since, watched the slow, imperfect, beautiful process of someone beginning to choose themselves. The early sessions are always the same, always carrying the particular quality of someone doing something their body remembers as risky, extending themselves into the exposed territory of genuine effort with the wariness of someone who has been hurt there before. The mistakes they make are recognizable. You have made every one of them. You don't tell them how to avoid the mistakes. You have learned that the mistakes are load-bearing. They hold the weight of the lessons that follow them. And shortcuts around the mistakes are also shortcuts around the lessons. And the lessons are the point. You tell them this is part of it. This specific difficulty you are in right now is not evidence that you are doing it wrong. It is part of the shape of the thing. Go through it, not around it. Go through it and see what is on the other side. They go through it. You watch from the other side, which is where you stand now. And you see in their going through exactly what was in your own, the first real evidence of the thing that was always there, rising to the surface in the specific way that genuine things rise when they are finally given room, not with a flourish, not with announcement, but with the quiet, definitive quality of something true arriving in its proper form. And there is this, the people they will reach, the people who will be in the rooms your young friend has not yet imagined, the rooms they will one day turn back toward the way you turn back toward yours. The chain is real. Each person who goes through the fire and comes out carrying a lantern creates conditions for someone else to find the path. The transformation is not individual, or rather, it is individual in its doing and communal in its meaning. Every person who masters themselves in this way, who moves from the paralysis of self-doubt to the practice of self-mastery, does not only change their own life, they change the atmosphere around them. They model the possible. They make it easier for the next person to believe, against all the internal evidence to the contrary, that the path through exists. You're thinking about all of this at the table in the morning light, with the notebook open and the pen in your hand and the shelf of filled ones behind you, when you notice something. The coffee has gone cold again. It always goes cold when you are inside a thought large enough to occupy you completely. You drink it cold and it tastes like the specific pleasure of a mind that was somewhere important and has returned. You smile at this. You smile at the coffee in the cold and the light and the city in the ordinary, extraordinary fact of being here, of having made it through, of being someone whose smile now is not performed for witnesses but felt genuinely, privately, as a response to the gift of a morning that is yours, a practice that is yours, a life that is finally, irreversibly, fundamentally yours. This is what mastery feels like from the inside. Not a trophy, not a view from a summit, not the permanent silence of the inner critic or the world's continuous approval or the absence of difficulty. Mastery feels like this: a table, a notebook, a pen, a cold cup of coffee, and the quiet certainty of someone who has built the most important thing a person can build. Not a career, not a body of work, not a reputation, though all of these may follow, but a self, a genuine, tested, load-bearing self that can hold the weight of the life it was made for. The city outside keeps moving. The light keeps shifting. The day is accumulating its hours with the same steady indifference it always has and always will. And you open the notebook to the next blank page, because there is always a next blank page, because the work is never finished, because finished is not the point and was never the point. And you write the first word, and then the next, and then the next. Not because inspiration arrived this morning, though sometimes it does. Not because the doubt is gone, though it is quieter than it was. Not because the path is clear and the outcome is guaranteed and the work ahead is less difficult than the work behind. Because you are someone who writes the next word. Because you are someone who returns. Because the flicker, that small, particular, unkillable light that was there, even in the worst of the gray mornings, even in the chaos month, even in the silence after the fall, the flicker never went out. And a person whose flicker has never gone out is a person who, in the end, in the patient and inevitable fullness of time, becomes exactly what they were always building toward. Not perfect, not finished, not protected from difficulty or immune to doubt or elevated above the ordinary human struggle with the gap between who we are and who we are capable of being, but real, but true, but here, at the table, in the morning light, with the pen moving and the work continuing and the shelf of evidence on the wall that says, in the only language that actually matters, the language of lived and demonstrated in daily renewed commitment, I was here. I did not stop. I became. This is the legacy. Not what was made, though what was made matters. The legacy is the becoming itself. The legacy is the proof, available to anyone willing to look at it honestly, that the path from self-doubt to self-mastery is not a myth, is not reserved for the specially gifted or the fortunately circumstanced, is not closed to anyone who was told too early that they were not enough. The path is real. It is difficult. It costs everything you think you cannot afford to spend and returns everything you didn't know you needed. It begins in a gray morning on a wet pavement with the simple, enormous, nearly impossible decision to keep moving. And it continues. It always continues. Here, now, in this morning, in this light, at this table. It continues. The word is written. The next one waits. Write it. You are never too late. You were never too broken. You were never too small, too afraid, too far behind, too damaged by what was done or not done to you in the rooms where you were made. You were always exactly, precisely the right person to walk this path, because it was your path, built from your particular ground, requiring your particular feet. No one else could have walked it for you. No one else could have found, at the end of it, what you found, yourself, whole, tested, undeniable. The flicker is still burning. It will always burn. That is the only thing you ever needed to know.